Welcome to the deep dive. So I want you to think about driving your car down the highway, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you need to stop, you just push your foot down on the brake pedal. And beneath that pedal, there's a physical, mechanical connection.
Yeah, usually hydraulic fluid that physically forces a clamp down onto the wheels.
Exactly. You feel the resistance. You have this direct, unbroken physical chain of command between your foot and the road. I mean, it's simple cause and effect. You are totally in control.
Right, it's a purely mechanical reality. The moment you press the pedal, the brake engages. There's no middleman questioning your decision.
But now imagine you're in a slightly different vehicle. You hit that exact same brake pedal, but instead of physically clamping down on the wheels, your foot is just sending an electronic suggestion to a computer.
Oh, right, a fly-by-wire situation.
Yeah, exactly. And the computer processes that suggestion, checks a bunch of sensors, and basically says, well, based on the data I'm getting from elsewhere in the vehicle, we aren't actually trying to stop right now, so I'm just going to ignore your foot.
Wow, that's a fundamental shift in the locus of control.
It really is. The machine isn't just a tool responding to your muscles anymore. It's become this independent decision maker operating on its own internal kind of uncompromising logic.
And that exact shift, going from a mechanical tool to a complex computer logic, is really the beating heart of our deep dive today.
It is. Today we're looking at the Aviation Safety Network investigation report of a deeply tragic event. This is the crash of TAM Flight 3054 at Congonhas Airport in São Paulo, Brazil.
Right, back on July 17th, 2007.
Yeah. And our mission today isn't just to talk about what went wrong on a rainy Tuesday evening. We want to really understand something aviation safety experts call the automation surprise.
Which is such a critical concept.
It really is. We're going to look at how a single human error interacted with the rigorous black and white logic of a modern Airbus A320, creating a situation the flight crew, well, they simply could not mentally decode in time.
And to understand the magnitude of that surprise, we first have to look at the environment they were operating in that night, because the context here makes every single technological failure 10 times worse.
So let's set the scene for you. It's 18.54 local time. The aircraft is an Airbus A320 coming in from Porto Alegre with 187 people on board.
And they're landing at Congonhas, which is runway 35L. That runway is notoriously short. It's only about 1880 meters long.
Right, which is tight for an A320 even on a good day. But on this night, it is raining heavily, and the runway had just been repaved to fix some surface irregularities.
Which sounds good in theory, right?
It does. But the tarmac hadn't yet been grooved. Grooves are those tiny channels cut into the asphalt that help water run off.
Yeah, and because it lacked those grooves, the runway was incredibly slick. We really need to talk about what that means physically for an aircraft touching down at 142 knots.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, without grooves to channel the water away, the water just sits on the surface. So when an airplane tire hits that standing water at high speed, it doesn't push through it to the asphalt.
It just glides over it.
Exactly. The water creates a physical barrier, literally lifting the tire off the ground. The aircraft is essentially water skiing. It's a phenomenon called hydroplaning, and it drastically reduces the effectiveness of your wheel brakes.
Which is terrifying. And up until the very moment the aircraft's wheels touched that wet asphalt, the flight was completely routine.
Complete normal, yeah.
But to understand the cascade of events that unfolded at touchdown, we actually need to rewind the tape to before the plane even took off. We need to talk about something called the minimum equipment list, or the MEL.
Right. So the minimum equipment list is this highly regulated, thoroughly tested manual. Commercial aircraft, they have a massive amount of redundancy built into them.
Like multiple backup systems for everything.
Exactly. So the MEL tells an airline exactly which parts of an airplane can be broken, malfunctioning, or just deactivated while still allowing the plane to fly perfectly safely.
And on this specific A320, the thrust reverser on the number 2 engine, that's the right side engine, was deactivated. It was basically pinned shut.
Yeah. And just a quick refresher for anyone listening, thrust reversers act like these giant scoops that deploy from the engines after landing. They redirect the engine's thrust forward to help slow the plane down.
Right, and flying with one deactivated thrust reverser is perfectly legal, right? Like under the MEL?
Oh, totally legal and safe. The aircraft still have its wheel brakes, its ground spoilers, and the other engine's working reverser. The crew obviously has to account for it in their landing calculations, but it is standard operational procedure.
Okay, but here is where the narrative gets incredibly complex. Airbus had recently introduced a brand new, supposedly simplified procedure for landing with a deactivated reverser.
Yeah, and this is crucial.
In the old days, a pilot would only pull the thrust lever for the working engine back into the reverse position upon landing. They would leave the lever for the broken engine sitting in the neutral idle position.
Which, intuitively makes sense to human logic. You only ask for reverse thrust from the engine that can actually physically give it to you.
Right. But humies are humans, and pilots under stress were occasionally making mistakes with that old procedure. They were pulling the wrong lever, getting confused, and inadvertently sending the good engine to idle while trying to reverse the broken one.
Which obviously doesn't help you stop.
Exactly. So Airbus changed the procedure. The new rule was when you land, just pull both thrust levers back into the reverse position, regardless of which one is broken.
Yeah, because the Airbus computer logic is smart enough to know which reverser is inoperative. It'll give you reverse thrust on the good engine and automatically block the power from increasing on the broken engine.
So it's designed to be a standardized, foolproof physical movement. You just pull both back every single time.
Right, it's an engineering solution to a human factors problem. The computer simplifies the physical action required by the pilot. But, and this is a massive chagee, but this new automated procedure came with a critical built-in catch.
Okay, what kind of catch?
By bringing the broken engine's lever into the reverse position, the computer commands that engine to stay at a slightly higher idle speed than it normally would in standard idle.
Wait, why?
It's just a quirk of the software harmonization. Because of this slight increase in forward thrust, the new procedure actually added up to 55 meters to the required landing distance calculations on a contaminated wet runway.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because that feels like a terrible trade-off. It's like having a car with a broken anti-lock brake system.
How do you mean?
Well, sure, you can still drive it, but you have to manually adjust your driving style and give yourself way more room to stop. If this new Airbus procedure is supposed to be simplified and handled by the computer, why does it penalize the crew by demanding an extra 55 meters of runway?
It's a great question.
Especially at an airport like Konganos, where literally every single meter of asphalt is precious. Why does the computer bump up the idle speed at all?
Like I said, it basically comes down to software harmonization.
Hmm.
The computer's engine management software is designed to operate symmetrically. When you pull a lever into the reverse detent, the software expects to be managing reverse thrust.
Right.
So even though the physical reverser doors on engine 2 are pinned shut, the software still harmonizes the engine's RPM to match the baseline expectation for that mode.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, to prevent the engine from stalling or spooling down too far while the software thinks it's in a high-demand state, it bumps up the baseline idle speed. And that slight spool up, well, it translates to forward thrust.
Wow. So to prevent a pilot from pulling the wrong lever, they accepted a guaranteed aerodynamic penalty.
Basically, yeah. Airbus weighed the risks. The old procedure was absolutely more aerodynamically efficient for braking. You didn't have that forward thrust penalty.
Right, because you just left the broken one in idle.
Exactly. But if a pilot mistakenly pulled the wrong lever under the old procedure, the consequences could be catastrophic. They decided that standardizing the human input was ultimately safer than the risk of human error in the heat of the moment, even if it cost them 55 meters.
Okay, so let's get back to the flight. They land at Konganos, a short, wet, ungrooved runway. They're coming in fast, water is pooling on the tarmac, and they know they have this deactivated reverser.
And at the exact moment of touchdown, the crew failed to use the new procedure.
Yeah. This is the precise second where human inputs decouple entirely from the aircraft's internal logic.
Let's look at the FMGEC behavior here, the flight management guidance in envelope computer.
Right. So instead of pulling both levers back to reverse, or even bringing both back to the neutral idle position, the pilot moved the lever for engine 1 into reverse, but he left the thrust lever for engine 2 positioned forward in the climb notch.
Yeah, it was left in the exact position used for flying.
And because that right lever was left in the climb position, the autothrust system, basically the plane's cruise control, did exactly what it was programmed to do.
Exactly. It tried to maintain the speed the pilots had previously selected for the approach. The right engine was actively pushing the plane forward, fighting the deceleration.
But the danger of that one misplaced lever goes so much deeper than just forward thrust, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. It triggers a massive, catastrophic failure of the plane's automated braking systems.
So let's talk about the ground spoilers. These are those large panels on top of the wings that flip up when a plane lands. They basically destroy the aerodynamic lift, forcing the heavy weight of the plane down onto the tires so the wheel brakes can actually grip the runway.
Right, and without ground spoilers, especially on a wet runway, you're essentially trying to brake a vehicle that still thinks it is a glider. The tires just cannot push through the water to grip the asphalt.
And the ground spoilers on TAM Flight 354 never deployed. They didn't deploy because of the strict programming of the Airbus computers, specifically something called gate logic.
Yeah, gate logic. Think of gate logic as a very strict bouncer at a club. To get inside, you have to pass multiple checkpoints, or gates. In computer programming, it's just a series of and/or conditions.
And the gate logic for the Airbus ground spoilers is absolute.
Completely absolute. The spoilers will only deploy both thrust levers are at idle, or if one is at idle and the other is at reverse.
But because the lever for engine 2 was sitting in the climb position, the computer checked its gates and saw that the conditions were not met.
Exactly. The gate remained closed. The logic dictated, hey, one lever is demanding climb power, therefore the pilot must be attempting a go-around, or we're still flying.
So I cannot deploy the spoilers because that would destroy lift and crash the plane.
Precisely.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, why wouldn't the pilot just manually deploy the spoilers? Well, they couldn't. The computer locked them out based on that lever position.
The system logic overrides the manual input in that state.
But going back to my car analogy from the intro, if I panic while driving and I accidentally leave my right foot resting heavily on the gas pedal while I absolutely slam my left foot onto the brakes, the car's brake pads still clamp down on the rotors.
Right, the car still tries to stop.
Yeah, the engine fights the brakes, sure, but the car still tries its best to stop. Why is this multi-million-dollar airplane completely disabling its own critical braking systems just because one lever is in the wrong spot?
Well, we really have to look at the history of why engineers program these strict gates. In the earlier days of aviation, there were horrific accidents where pilots accidentally deployed ground spoilers while the aircraft was still in the air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and doing that instantly destroys your lift, and the plane just drops like a stone. To prevent those mid-air deployments, engineers had to create an ironclad safeguard.
So the computer relies entirely on sensor states.
Exactly. It isn't looking out the window. It doesn't know it's hydroplaning in São Paulo. The logic assumes that the physical position of the thrust levers is the ultimate ground truth indicator of the pilot's intention.
It assumes the pilot knows exactly what they're doing.
Right. And because those spoilers didn't deploy, this whole domino effect occurs. The auto brake function, which the crew had actually remembered to arm before landing, never activated.
Wait, really? Why not?
Because the auto brake's gate logic requires the ground spoilers to open first. It's a sequential logic path.
Unbelievable. So because of one lever left in climb, they lost the reverse thrust on the right engine, they lost the aerodynamic braking of the spoilers, and they lost the automated wheel brakes.
Yeah, and the investigation found this increased their required stopping distance by an astonishing 50%.
I mean, this is the purest definition of an automation surprise. The pilot's mental model is, we're landing, the wheels are hitting the ground, we're stopping.
But the computer's mode status is, one lever is in climb, we are still flying.
The human and the machine are completely out of sync, and they're out of sync at 142 knots on a runway that is rapidly disappearing.
And, as if lacking spoilers and auto brakes wasn't bad enough, the Airbus's brain does one more thing here. It executes a mode transition that really seals their fate.
Are you talking about thrust lock?
Yes, it triggers a function called thrust lock.
Right. So when the nose gear touches down about 2.5 seconds after the main gear, the pilot pulls the engine one lever into the reverse position, and that specific action causes the auto thrust function to disconnect entirely.
Right, which makes sense in the FCOM logic. You can't have the auto thrust system trying to automatically manage speed while one engine is simultaneously being commanded by the pilot to throw thrust backwards.
That would just be chaos.
Exactly. The system recognizes a conflict, gracefully bows out, and hands manual control back to the pilot.
But when the auto thrust disconnects, it triggers thrust lock on engine 2, the one still sitting in the climb position. And thrust lock froze the power of engine 2 at its exact current value.
Yeah, which the flight data recorder captured as an engine pressure ratio, or EPR, of 1.18.
And to give you some context, normal idle thrust gives you an EPR of roughly 1.0. A full takeoff thrust might be around 1.3 or 1.4. So an EPR of 1.18 is practically telling that engine to push the plane forward at cruising thrust.
And it stayed locked at that high forward power level until the very end.
See? Thrust lock. That sounds like a safety feature designed to lock a malfunctioning engine down to zero to make it safe.
Mhm.
Why in the world would a safety feature lock an engine at a high forward power level while a plane is hurtling down a short runway?
It's a great question, and it raises a fascinating point about how engineers design fail-safes for multiple scenarios. The engineers at Airbus had to anticipate a totally different kind of failure.
Okay, like what?
Imagine you're flying at 30,000 feet. Your levers are physically resting in the climb detent, but the autothrust computer is actively managing the engines at a very low power setting because you're descending.
Uh,
If the autothrust computer suddenly fails or disconnects due to a sensor glitch, you do not want those engines to instantly surge up to massive climb power just because the physical levers happen to be sitting in that notch.
Oh, because that violent surge could severely destabilize the aircraft in midair.
Exactly. So thrust lock acts as a buffer. It says, the automatic system just quit. I'm going to freeze the engines exactly where they are right now so there are no sudden violent changes in thrust.
Wow. So it's basically the computer throwing its hands up and hitting pause. It freezes the state to buy the pilot time to assess the situation.
Yeah, and the system design is very clear. The only way to disable thrust lock is for the pilot to manually move the thrust lever.
So the electronic centralized aircraft monitor, the ECAM, would be flashing a warning to move the lever, right?
Yes, the computer basically says, I am holding this power setting until you, the human, physically move the lever to tell me what you want.
But the human didn't move the lever.
No. The pilot suffered from what human factors experts call cognitive tunneling.
Which is when you get completely fixated on one thing, right?
Exactly. His brain was so overwhelmed by the sheer sensory input of the failure, the fact that the plane wasn't slowing down, the spoilers hadn't popped up, the auto brakes weren't grabbing, that his attention narrowed entirely to the immediate visceral sensation of the runway vanishing ahead of them.
He's just staring out the window.
Yeah. He never looked down at his hands to realize his right hand had left the lever in the forward position.
And the manual brakes, pressing the pedals with their feet, they were only applied 6 full seconds after touchdown. At 140 knots, 6 seconds is an absolute eternity.
It's huge. They covered hundreds of meters of runway without any braking whatsoever.
And they didn't press the pedals to maximum deflection for another 5 seconds.
By then, the physics of the situation were just completely unrecoverable.
I mean, they had one engine screaming in reverse and one engine locked in forward climb thrust. The asymmetric power caused the A320 to veer sharply off the left side of the runway.
Yeah, the flight data recorder shows them desperately using the rudder and differential braking to try and keep it straight, but the aerodynamic forces were just too great.
The aircraft crossed right over Washington Luis Avenue at a ground speed of 96 knots and collided with a concrete TAM Express building and a fuel service station. All 187 people on board were killed, along with 12 people on the ground.
I mean, it's just a profoundly tragic situation. And as investigators, the ultimate call isn't just what the computer did. The systems performed exactly as programmed based on the inputs they received.
Right.
The final, most difficult question is why? Why did highly trained professionals make this specific input error on that specific night?
And the investigation report is remarkably transparent here. It lists several human factors as undetermined, meaning they couldn't definitively prove them, but they are highly probable contributors. First, there's the medical aspect. The captain had reported having a mild headache during the approach.
And we don't know the severity. But any degraded physical state can impair cognitive function and psychomotor capabilities, especially when an unpredictable situation suddenly demands absolute peak mental performance.
Yeah. Then there's the training aspect. The first officer was operating under something called a right seat certification.
Right, which is essentially a fast-track qualification. It allows a pilot to sit in the co-pilot seat and assist, but it often lacks the really rigorous left seat captain level emergency management training needed for this exact kind of complex cascading system failure.
He just didn't have the depth of training to recognize the automation trap they had fallen into.
He really didn't.
Furthermore, the airline's training relied heavily on computer-based training, or CBT.
And this is where we find a massive gap in how we prepare humans for emergencies. CBT allows an airline to push a huge volume of pilots through training quickly and cheaply on a computer screen.
Right, but it raises serious questions about the quality of that training.
Exactly. Sitting in a quiet, air-conditioned office, clicking through a multiple-choice module about how thrust lock works on a screen that just creates book knowledge.
It doesn't prepare you for the reality.
Not at all. It does absolutely nothing to prepare you for the visceral sensory overload of a dark cockpit, the noise of the heavy rain, the violent vibration of a hydroplaning aircraft, and the sheer terror of an airplane that just refuses to obey you.
The gap between book knowledge and sensory knowledge is just massive, and that leads to the most haunting hypothesis the investigators offer.
What's that?
Did the crew deliberately, or perhaps inadvertently through muscle memory, attempt to use the old procedure?
Ah, right.
Because remember, the new procedure required them to pull both levers back, but it penalized them 55 meters of runway. The old procedure was to pull only the working reverser.
There is a very high probability the captain inadvertently left one lever in climb while attempting that old procedure. Whether it was a deliberate split-second choice to save that 55 meters of runway distance or just a lapse in muscle memory under immense stress, the execution was flawed.
I really want you, the listener, to put yourself in that cockpit for a second. You've had a long day, you're tired, you have a headache, it's raining, you're landing on a notoriously short, ungrooved runway that you know demands perfection.
Yeah, the pressure is immense.
You reach out and you make one tiny muscle memory mistake with your right hand, but instead of the airplane flashing a giant red light and saying, "Hey, did you mean to leave this lever in climb while we are landing?" the airplane just silently accepts the input and completely reconfigures its internal braking logic.
And that is the crux of the cockpit coordination breakdown. It isn't just about a pilot forgetting a step in the manual. It's a systemic failure in how we train pilots to handle system degradation.
They lost situational awareness.
Completely. Because the physical feedback at the aircraft, the fact that it wasn't slowing down, did not match their mental model of having just landed. They were locked in a cognitive loop, trying to solve an aerodynamic problem with the wheel brakes, while the airplane was executing a strict gate logic problem.
So what does this all mean? If we summarize this tragedy, we're looking at a chain of events where every single link feels so manageable on its own.
Yeah, taken individually, none of it seems disastrous.
Right. A recently paved but ungrooved runway making things a bit slippery. A perfectly legal deactivated reverser. A manufacturer's procedure change designed to stop human error, which inadvertently created a runway length penalty.
And a single thrust lever left out of position.
And an uncompromising computer logic that decided the plane was still flying. That chain resulted in the loss of 199 lives.
It is a stark reminder that in aviation, as in many complex fields, accidents are rarely caused by a single catastrophic failure. They're caused by the alignment of multiple, seemingly benign conditions.
We started this deep dive talking about the brake pedal in your car, that physical mechanical connection that gives you absolute, unbroken authority over the machine. TAM Flight 30C54 forces us to confront what happens when we replace that physical connection with lines of code.
It leaves us with a critical, ongoing challenge for the future of engineering. Because as our technology, from airplanes to autonomous driving systems to medical robotics, gets smarter, more automated, and more complex, it is largely doing so to protect us from our own human errors.
Right, it's supposed to save us.
Exactly. But in adding layers of automation to save us from ourselves, are we accidentally creating systems so dense and opaque that humans can no longer troubleshoot them in the crucial 10 seconds of an emergency? When the computer is designed to know best, what happens the moment a human hands it an impossible riddle?
It makes you wonder, the next time you press down on a pedal or push a button or pull a lever, are you actually commanding the machine? Or are you just submitting a request and hoping the computer agrees with your reality?